Dear students, welcome back to Industrial Property. So that's HOE 6065. And well, we are continuing on with trademarks. So we have looked at some of the relevant aspects of trademarks in the last few lectures. And well, we continue in that strain of thought, and I'll be exploring some other sections and articles and things like that. So we'll be focusing on the trademarks directive, and of course, this directive, as you know, is applicable throughout the European Union. So all member states have their legal systems, and of course their respective national trademark legislations, which are in tune with the trademarks directive. So well, we were looking at revocation last time, or more in the sense, what can a trademark, how can a trademark be lost or cease to be registered, even though you have gone through the whole registration process. And so we'll be looking at individual examples here, and also from the articles, different norms and viewpoints. But before I go into all of that, I want to talk about Article 15 of the Trademarks Directive, and this deals with exhaustion of the rights conferred by a trademark. Now, I'm really, it's amazing how something that can be so deep and so problematic, and I'm talking about the concept of exhaustion of rights, can just fit into such a tiny little Article 15, tiny little paragraph. It really is a very deceptive article. Don't get confused or deceived by looking at it and thinking that, oh, exhaustion is nothing. Exhaustion is a huge topic. Yeah, it's super big, and of course, exhaustion is where your trademarks law collides with your competition law. Now, basically, what is exhaustion? Well, a lot of students who do write thesis on this subject tend to do it in the master's courses, because this is a really very complex and complicated area of the law, and it's evolving all the time. And of course, there are a lot of political, economic issues that play a role over here. So I thought I'll spend a bit of time on exhaustion, so just so that you know what it means. Exhaustion is also covered under copyright law, patent law, design law. It comes under all forms of IP law. So wherever you go, you will see exhaustion. So a trademark shall not entitle the proprietor, the owner, to prohibit its use in relation to goods which have been put on the market in the union under the trademark by the proprietor or with the proprietor's consent. Yeah. And two is paragraph 1 shall not apply where there exist legitimate reasons for the proprietor to oppose further commercialization of the goods, especially where the condition of the goods is changed or impaired after they have been put on the market. Now, let me just give you some examples of this, yeah, to sort of clarify this better. Let's say you buy you buy a car, all right? You have a Volkswagen car, or a Mercedes car, or a Porsche, or whatever, Ferrari, yeah. And so you have been driving it, you're happy with it, and you've been getting all the attention that you want in life, yeah. But now it's getting a bit old and dated, and so maybe it's giving you trouble, maybe it doesn't suit your lifestyle. You can't have a Ferrari now that you have kids, and you have other things to worry about. And so in that situation, what do? Well, maybe you want to sell the Ferrari, so you go to eBay and put your Ferrari for sale on eBay, or the local equivalent in your country. Now what's happening here is you put the ad and you say, I have a Ferrari for sale. Could the Ferrari company, the original Italian company, could they sort of sue you and say, how dare you use our trademark Ferrari? No, they can't. The trademark Ferrari shall not entitle the proprietor, Ferrari the company, to prohibit its use in relation to goods which have been put on the market in the union under that trademark by the Ferrari company or with the Ferrari company's consent. Now, there has been a bit of an issue here with consent, because consent can be deemed consent or implied consent or express consent, and this is a huge area. Yeah. Just to give you another example of what consent can mean, well, let's say it's the pandemic is over. I go to a bar, Nimeta, and I see some attractive person there, and so I go up to her and say like, "Hey, how are you?" And so we sort of have a few drinks and stuff, and we joke and laugh, and things look really good. Now, and then she says, "Okay, Pawan, why don't you come over? I have a little place in the old town." So I'm like, "Okay, yeah, okay, yeah." And so I go there, and then we have a few more drinks, a few more laughs, and then things get frisky in a way. And now next thing leads to another, and then one thing, and next, and then uh, what do I know? I know like I'm jumping on top of her, all right, and she's like, "Oh, don't do that, you horrible Indian." Now, you see, what's happened over here is, in a classic criminal law sense, consent. Yeah, I assumed that we have implied consent over here, and well, obviously she doesn't agree on that point of view. Now you often have this similar situation in businesses. Let's say you have a rental agreement and you are paying the rent for the flat, and the landlord says, "Well, we have this agreement, but yeah, from March onwards, the rent goes up 100 euros," and you don't say yes, you don't say no, you just pay 100 euros in March and in April and in May. Then basically it's consent, right? I mean, you agreed to it. Now, of course, you could turn around in August and say, "What the hell? I'm not paying 100 euros anymore." But now you see the issue here is there's an express consent, there's an implied consent, and this can be a very tricky situation. So this used to be one of the defenses that, well, I'm doing this trademark thing because I have your consent. Yeah, you allowed me to do it, so it's okay. Did you allow me to do it in an express sense, or was it just an implication, an implied thing? Now, of course, this of course causes a lot of issues. Now, again, because this is purely a law course, we have to look at this in the context of assumptions. And now this is again a very classic legal situation. There are facts and then there are assumptions, and consent can also come in that category. So a fact, maternity is a fact. Yeah, the child was born, came out of the woman, so obviously she's the mother. The doctor was there, the nurse was there, they saw the baby come out of the woman's uterus, or during delivery, so of course she's the mother. So that's a fact. Who's the father? Yeah, that's an assumption. All right. Legally, the assumption would be, if I'm married to my wife and we've been married for more than 9 months, then the law assumes that I am the dad. Yeah. Of course, the baby doesn't come out with the name of the dad and the mom written on the forehead. No, these are facts and assumptions, and the same would go in with consent. This really goes into the realm of evidence law, and as you can imagine, this can be a huge gray zone. There can be a lot of issues here under criminal law, under civil law. Now, why would I be talking about criminal law in trademarks? Well, because most countries also provide for criminal law proceedings under trademark law. So you have to be aware of both of these situations. So in short, consent is this very heavily loaded term, and you have to be very careful about what it means from a legal viewpoint. Now, of course, there could be some legitimate reasons for the proprietor to oppose further commercialization of the goods, especially where the condition of the goods is changed or impaired after they've been put on the market. Now, where would this arise? Maybe some of the situations that could be are seen in the context of cases which deal with pharmaceutical products, now Pfizer, Viagra, or whatever. And well, this was especially very relevant when the European Union was not as wide as it is today. So you had a lot of issues in the 1990s, for example. And one would be, well, if you look at medicines, yeah, for a medicine you have to open the package and put inside the Estonian translation or the Finnish translation or the Italian translation. Sometimes, because of national legislations, you have to, impose some, put a sticker on the packaging of a food product. Sometimes, because of very weird language requirements in individual member states of the European Union, you may even have to change the name a bit, or the trademark a bit. Yeah. Now, another situation could be where you take a normal car, yeah, a normal Volkswagen Beetle, and then you put monster tires on it, yeah, and so you drive around, and of course now you want to sell this product. Now, in all of these situations, the original proprietor would be like, hey, what are you doing? I mean, we supplied drugs to you, we are Pfizer, we gave the drug, and now you are opening the packet and putting in, different things, or you are changing the product in some way. Or in the case of, this monster tires, this is now not strictly speaking engineering. This is just, somebody being stupid and, modifying an original product to do something that it may not have been designed for. And in that situation, the trademark proprietor can say that exhaustion does not exist. Another situation very commonly found was in the UK. Now, the United Kingdom has a lot of idiosyncrasies, yeah, and we have all seen that with Brexit. But of course, the UK is also a very important global country. It is a permanent member of the United Nations. It and France are the only two nuclear powers in Europe. I mean, in the European Union context. Russia is the next one. Um, uh, and then, of course, UK is not in the EU anymore, but there are a lot of these fun cases with them. And one of the situations was that Tesco was in the UK and in France, and they had these Xboxes or PlayStations. And now, the problem here is, in the UK you have 3 pins in the, electric socket, yeah, and in the rest of Europe you have, these 2 pins. Yeah, remember, right? So that's how electric gadgets work. And so, Tesco in France had a good deal, and they got like, 10,000 Xboxes, and they were selling them in France. And then they said, hey, it's just across the, channel, and so maybe we should divert some of our products to Tesco UK. And in doing that time, remember, Brexit had not happened. So what the Tesco company did was, well, of course, they had to open the packaging and remove the 2 pin plugs and replace them with third party 3 pin plugs. Now, this caused a lot of problems, right? Because Microsoft said, our products are guaranteed, and so there is a certain requirement. And of course, what you are doing now is you are replacing a genuine product with a third party product. So first of all, you're opening the package, and now you're replacing this. As a retailer, these are a lot of problematic issues. And now you're selling this product in the UK under the trademark Microsoft Xbox. And of course, this is not acceptable. This is not about exhaustion anymore, because you are modifying the product. And what happens if somebody plugs in something, in the UK, and the whole house catches fire? Who's responsible for that? So, well, I used to give a course on competition law and IP. Yeah, just competition law and IP. 6 credits, crazy course in the masters, teaching and studies. So I think it's going to start again from next year. So something to keep an eye for. I mean, if you're interested in this stuff, but huge. All right. Article 15, and I've already spoken for 14 minutes on that, and I'm just getting warmed up. So you can imagine how Article 15 works. Exhaustion is super crazy. All right. But it's a very, very important concept, especially in a commercial sense. All right. Now, of course, with Brexit, you're going to have more fun because the UK is not party to any of these EU directives anymore. But IP laws are the same throughout the world. And what has happened historically is that the European Union has used this concept of exhaustion in a very wicked manner. And so they have created this fortress Europe, and within Europe, exhaustion shouldn't exist. So if you're in Estonia or in Finland or in Germany or in France or in Italy, you have the same rules. But when it comes to goods or products or services that come from outside the EU, then the exhaustion rules are a bit different. And this is really actually cheating in a way. Yeah? And the US has often complained a lot about this, and many other countries as well. So, as a lawyer, it'll be good fun to see how all of this plays with the UK, because there'll be a ton of cases coming soon. And well, as lawyers, one thing that makes us happiest is a lot of cases. Yeah, okay. So they keep everybody busy. But now let's forget exhaustion and move on to what we had started discussing last time, which is how can a mark cease to be a registered trademark. So we looked at four grounds: invalidity, revocation, surrender, and expiry. And a point to be noted over here is that in the Trademarks Directive, there are a few articles which should be covered. And just note, there's Article 16, yeah, which is use of trademarks, and then Articles 19, 20, and 21. So these are very important articles that need to be covered over here. So when we look at revocation for lack of genuine use, Article 16, if within a period of 5 years following the date of the completion of the registration procedure, the proprietor has not put the trademark to genuine use in the member state in connection with the goods or services in respect of which it is registered, or if such use has been suspended during a continuous 5-year period, the trademark shall be subject to limitations as provided under Article 17, 19, etc., etc. So, crazy, yeah. Article 4, commencement of the Article 16, subarticle 4 would be commencement of the 5-year period, and also subarticle 5, what is use, and use, in different forms. Use for affixing, all of this is very important. And then subarticle 6, use of the trademark with the consent of the proprietor shall be deemed to constitute use by the proprietor. Yeah, so our old friend consent is back. And yeah, this is crazy, because consent is not stated over here as implied consent or express consent. Now, why am I making such a big deal about this? Because, this is the gray zone, right? It's not black and white. It's not consent or non-consent. It is, there are different shades of consent over here. And sometimes people agree to something not in an express way, but by, not by words, but by actions. So a huge problem area over here. So when we look at revocation for lack of genuine use, you can see that this 5 years is this magic number. Yeah. And of course, what is genuine use? Now, there are two contexts over here. There is genuine, and then there is use. So use is defined under Article 16, subarticle 5. Use of a trademark in a form differing in elements which do not alter the distinctive character of the mark in the form in which it was registered, regardless of whether or not the trademark in the form as used is also registered in the name of the proprietor. Affixing of the trademark to goods or to the packaging thereof, concerned solely for export purposes. This is getting a bit more complex than one thought, and this is very often the case with IP law. Well, maybe I'm just a bit biased because I've been dealing with this since 1998. 2008, 18, 19, 20, 21, 23 years now. And so, of course, this is crazy. This can really go either way. So when we're looking at genuine use, what's the basic philosophy? The basic philosophy would be that, if you don't want to use a trademark, why the hell do you want to register it? You're just grabbing trademarks and then putting them all up in a little book of yours without any reason, and then that's not really acceptable. So it's like, you have Mercedes class A, Mercedes C class, Mercedes D class, Mercedes F class, Mercedes, I don't know, Z class. So what the hell? What are you doing? I mean, why would you do all that if you're not genuinely using it? Now, as a trademark attorney, I've had cases where, multinational companies, these toothbrush companies, they're called fast moving consumer goods. They sell a lot, high volumes, low margins, and then, of course, everybody has a toothbrush, everybody uses toothpaste. So you don't even count it as something that you're buying. Yeah, I mean, it's not like your iPhone or your smartphone that you buy once in 2 years. This is something that you buy every uh, other week or month or something, depending on how many times you brush your teeth. Yeah. So of course, many of these companies, just apply. So it was crazy. I used to work for in a law firm, and then I had this one client, and they had like 100 trademark applications a month. This is crazy. I mean, this is not just about products anymore or services anymore. This is about cornering all the good words, keeping them for yourself, blocking out competitors, causing friction with other competitors. Marketing department gone crazy. That's the whole philosophy there now. And then of course, this is extremely unacceptable from a trademark law perspective. Of course, a lawyer would say, yeah, client wants to register, sure, register every word in the dictionary. Who cares? But of course, this is not just a law in that sense. Now, of course, I'm old school, and trademark law has changed over a period of the century, the past century. And so earlier trademarks and the law was seen as sacrosanct, and it wasn't. The whole idea was that this is for the public good, this is for consumers, this is not for manufacturers or proprietors. But then philosophies have changed over a period of time, and now things have become more softer in a way. So yeah, things change. That's how life is nowadays. Trademark law is seen more as, do whatever. Why should the state interfere? But of course, as you can see here, Article 16 shows that it's not still the Wild West. You still have certain rules to follow. So, genuine use, since the directive doesn't really help, well, there are case laws on this, and genuine use would mean not merely token use. Yeah. So it has to guarantee the identity or the origin of the goods or services. So again, like many concepts, very difficult to explain in just a few minutes. So you have to read case laws. Yeah, and then reading is good. I mean, the more you read, the better. From my own personal experience, I can tell you, I may have said this before, as a young lawyer, I had passed out law school and I was working in a law firm. I had no idea about trademarks law or procedures and things. Of course, you're supposed to learn some of this stuff in law school, but I mean, I'm not going to be the one who teaches you 100%. Usually, generally, what happens is experience, work experience, or whatever teaches you 100%. The best teacher is you're handling this matter on your own. You go to the court, you get an order, or the judge hits you on the head with the order, and so you learn things the hard way. And whatever you learn the hard way, you never forget. Yeah, it's like learning to ride a cycle and you fall down and you break your knee. You won't forget that. Or when you learn how to swim and you do something stupid and you almost drown, you'll never forget that for the rest of your life. So of course, that's experience, which is why I always say, if you get the chance, get the opportunity, go and work in a law firm, get exposure to courts, get exposure to judges, get exposure to the whole civil criminal law system, police and bureaucracy and all of those things. That's very, very important. These are the formative years of your life. Don't waste them away on TikTok or something. Get experience. But of course, with pandemic and coronavirus, that's not so easy. But keep this in mind. All right. So the very first case is the Ansul case. Very, very interesting. A bit dated, like everything, but old is gold. And a lot of the newer case laws build up on some of these older ones. I have a list of case laws, yeah, and then of course, there are old ones and then there are more newer ones. And you shouldn't be complaining because when I was practicing IP law very actively, especially trademark law, then we even had cases that were 100 years old. And in contract law, you have cases from the 1800s, and also Salomon versus Salomon and things like that. So it's old wine, but older the better. So what's the Ansul case? Well, basically, Minimax was a trademark that they were using for fire extinguishers. Fire extinguisher, right? You see a fire, what do? You have a fire extinguisher, you do choof, and then, I don't know, you pull something and then you spray whatever on the fire, and so that's done. Now, if you look at a fire extinguisher, it has a date of expiry. Yeah. This is just a big cylinder, but of course, what's inside is more important. It's a powder, or it's a gas, or whatever. So there are two aspects of this business. One is you sell something, and then the other is the after sales service, which would mean that you maintain fire extinguishers, and then you refill them or whatever. And then, of course, most of us don't care, but if you have an office or a business premises or something, then fire safety regulations are very important on a ship, in the airport, in the harbor, in a shopping mall. So of course, this company was offering both services. It was offering fire extinguishers for sale and also after sales service. And now they got the trademark registered. Minimax, it's a very good trademark. Checks all the points that are important in this context. And so it's something that's small, but it's maximum, Minimax. And the trademark was registered for fire extinguishers. Yeah, remember I spoke about classes and goods and services. So it's very important to remember that different goods can be in the same class, and different classes can have the same goods. Yeah, that's a very loaded statement. You have to be very careful about this, because this is, when you read those big fat books on trademark law, you will understand the depth of this context. Of course, we are just looking at a 3-credit graduation course, so I'm not overdoing it for you, but again, deep issues. So they stopped selling fire extinguishers. They stopped making them, but they continued with the repair and after sales service. I'm talking about Ansul. And then somebody got upset about this, and then the owner of the mark Minimax ceased to sell the fire extinguishers, but they continued repairing it. And so Ajax, I think, yeah, and then a rival competitor tried to steal the trademark from them. Now, why do people do that? This is business, all right? In business, everything is fair and square. I'm sorry if you feel offended by that statement, but that's life. So stop being a snowflake. Yeah, sorry about this, but of course, this is what litigation goes into. And well, it's a dog eat dog world, and people want to steal what you think belongs to you. And if they can do it legally, then that's life. So of course, the competitor said you had a trademark, it was registered for X, and of course you're not doing X, that service anymore, or that you're not making that product anymore. So you can see how this comes up here. And luckily, they were able to fight off this attack by saying that genuine use means not only use in the context of what it's originally registered for, but also for services which are similar or analogous thereto. Now that's a very wide gray zone. So read this case, and you'll understand more. Then there was this Laboratoire de la Mer trademark case, and you're supposed to show genuine use. So just to show genuine use, they said, well, we have sold products worth 800 British pounds of money. Now, what the hell is that? 800 pounds. That's nothing. All right. I mean, this is sale. Okay, you can manufacture all these receipts, and you can present a file. But if that's your real sales, in the last 5 years, I mean, that's what you sell, 800 pounds worth of a product, then of course that's pathetic, and it's not genuine use. It's just you're just trying to show that you are doing something without actually doing something. So of course, who did you sell it to? Who was the manufacturer? Who was the distributor? Who was the retailer? Who is the consumer? And then of course, people think that you can make a forgery and just print out bills and just change the dates, but that's not how it works. If you try to claim that you have made a lot of sales, Yeah, have you filed VAT? Yeah. How do you backdate that now? Um, have you paid your income tax returns on your profits? No. Then how can you say that you are making a lot of sales? Are you making them at a loss? Yeah, I mean, there's this interconnection between different agencies, which is why forgery is an art. All right, you need to leave this to the experts, and it's not everybody's cup of tea. Of course, you have lawyers and accountants who do these sort of things. Again, rule number one: learn to bend the law without breaking the law. Yeah, as a lawyer. Rule number two for a lawyer: don't get caught. Yeah, and rule number three: if somebody has to go to prison, make sure it's the client and not you. So as a young lawyer, don't do something stupid if you don't know what you're doing. All right, and especially forging things and making fake documents is a bit more complicated, because you really have to consider the different angles that can come up here. So now again, this is just a course on IP law. I'm not here to teach you how to do all these things. As a lawyer, you really should be very careful about doing anything like this. And this is important because, as a young lawyer, I also faced pressures. I had clients, I had seniors in the law firm, people who I thought were in my team, or I'm in their team, but everybody's out on their own, and so it can be a real jungle out there, yeah, and everybody on their own. And if you do something uh, for a client just because somebody told you to do it without using your head, then there can be serious consequences. So of course, to prove genuine use, there are different grounds over here. And as you can see in Article 16, sub-article 5, even if exporting something is a use, or using of the trademark in a form differing in elements which do not alter the distinctive character of the mark. Yeah, so your trademark is Viagra, and you are selling it as uh, the Niagara of the human body. Niagara Falls. The power of Viagra is Niagara. Or you do something like that, and you don't use the trademark Viagra as much as you should. You as in Pfizer, then again it's still possible to work around this. And this 4-year period is 5-year period is of course calculated, so you have a lot of issues with that as well. So sometimes you can use it in different forms, sometimes not. So again, we'll be looking at this aspect, and clearly the case law says that this is all a matter of impression. Remember, we are dealing with the ultimate effect, which is on the consumer. A consumer is a person of average intelligence and imperfect recollection. Proper reasons for non-use. Yeah, so just because you are doing something, it may be that you are have proper reasons, and that would of course be Article 17. So again, something to keep in mind. So you can read that over there. So of course, very important. So sometimes you want to use a trademark, but you can't because of underlying circumstances. It's not your fault. It's just that you can't do it for some reason, and it should be justifiable, of course, legally speaking. So there is this Nestle versus Zeta Espacial case, and there was this company. They were trying to make this lollipop. Lollipop is what it's like this ball on a stick, and then you lick it, right, or whatever. And of course, they were trying to make this special type of lollipop which had, a bit of a twist to it. So it had multiple layers, and so outside was something, and then inside was some special ball of chocolate or something. So it was multi-layered, and not like this, but more from inside. So there was this core, and then around it were other layers. Now, lollipops are not rocket science, yes, but sometimes manufacturing it can be very complicated, especially when you remember that lollipops are not refrigerated usually. Yeah, storage of this thing can be quite a problem. So of course, how do you fill up the different internal layers and then storage conditions and stuff? So there was this company that was trying to develop a lollipop for 9 years, and they still couldn't do it. Yeah, despite all their R&D efforts, research and development, RDI, research, development, and innovation efforts. And so I mean, they applied for the trademark and they got it. They got it registered, but they are still not selling any products. They're still not using the trademark in a commercial sense because they're still stuck with RDI. So a rival company tried to steal their trademark from them because it was Magic Ball, which is again a very good trademark, especially if it's registered. And so in a court of law, they were able to prove that it's not because we don't want to sell this product, but because we have genuine problems and we have spent so much money, and this is a research team. We have scientists and we are working on it. So of course the court allowed that as a defense. But a routine difficulty like, oh, my money got over, or the bank did not give me a loan, or my father-in-law stopped paying me money, that's not an excuse, of course. Sometimes you can't sell a product because there is, in the case of Cuban Havana cigars, there's this US trade embargo which was there for a very long time. Cuba is next to USA, and they had this thing, and then of course relationships and stuff. And then Havana cigars were very often exported to the US, a very popular product. And then came Fidel Castro and the revolution, and so the US put a trade embargo. So now here's the proprietor. He has a trademark, Habana, for Cuban cigars, registered in the US, but cannot sell the product because there's a trade embargo. So of course, in this situation, you have to accept that the law doesn't allow you to sell a trademark or to sell a product with that trademark. But of course, in this situation, the evidence that was laid out was not clear because the embargo was imposed in 1962. I think when Kennedy was around, or just after Kennedy. And this guy had not been selling for 26 years before that. So of course you can't use the trade embargo as an excuse anymore. Another reason could be tobacco products. Yeah, those of you who know about tobacco products, well, earlier you could have cigarettes, and then you could alcohol products and tobacco products which could be used for advertising. You could have sponsorships of sport events and things, and then all of that stopped. Now you have different rules about trademarks like Marlboro or something, and newer rules all the time. So they're trying to cut down how much can be the use of a trademark on a cigarette packet. And cigarette packets now have all these awful ugly photos of people with diseases, but lesser and lesser of the trademark. So what do you do if you have a situation where some countries say that you cannot sell cigarette or tobacco products with that trademark because they think that peer pressure is what causes a rise of smoking in children, because they have always heard about Marlboro, and so they want to try Marlboro cigarettes, and so you just take out Marlboro from the name and now there's no peer pressure. Of course, things don't always work so simply, but that's not the gist over here. The problem here is, I'm a trademark owner, my trademark is Marlboro, I want to sell my products with my trademark. I'm not allowed to do that for whatever reason, and what can I do? So of course, genuine use comes up over here. So let's stop here for today. I really overdid it, but let's continue again next time. So until then, thank you and goodbye.